Hello, Sarah of SEK Handmade here, and we're back again to talk about pattern testing. You guys, pattern testing is something I am passionate about. It is an important part of the pattern publishing process, and I want you to have as much knowledge as possible to make a great informed decision about whether you would like to pattern test or not, and when is the right time to volunteer. In my last video, which I'll link down in the description below, we talked about what is pattern testing, why would you want to pattern test, and where you can find pattern tests if you decide that you're interested. Once you've found a pattern test, though, it's important to carefully consider, is it the right time and project to volunteer for? We're going to talk about all those tips today, as well as how to give yourself the best chance of getting chosen for that pattern test that you'd really like to do. If you watched my last video, then you know that I volunteered for my first pattern test totally on a whim and then proceeded to panic. I don't want you to do that. So I want to share with you some things to think about before you volunteer for a pattern test and then regret it. So I think the very first thing that you should think about when you are going to go volunteer for a pattern test, or whether you're just deciding, is this pattern test right for me, is do you love the pattern? Now, I think you're probably saying, of course, Sarah, why would I have been drawn to test that if the pattern hadn't caught my eye? But I think a lot of times our first glance at a pattern, we can easily say, oh, I love it, I want to make it. But when we look a little more critically at the pattern, we may decide that actually it's maybe not quite right for us. If you know your style, your sense, how you like things to fit, that can go a long way in deciding if a pattern test is right for you. And this doesn't just go for garments. If you like to wear fitted hats and that hat looks super cool on the designer's tester call, but it's just a slouchy hat, you may say, I don't really care to test that pattern. In pattern testing, almost always, the designer wants you to test the pattern exactly how it's written. And so making a large modification like changing a hat from slouchy to fitted may not be an appropriate thing to do during a pattern test. So if you look more critically at a pattern and you think, I like that pattern a lot, but I would want to make a modification, be it changing a slouchy hat to a fitted hat, adding a brim to a hat that has a brim, adding ribbing around a cowl, adding like little appliques or embroidery to something. Those are all things that I think go outside the bounds of pattern testing, larger modifications. Taking a sweater that's meant to be a very straight fit and adding shaping to it. If you want to do that when you purchase a pattern, go to town. It's yours to modify however you want. But during a pattern test, most often designers expect you to work the pattern as written so that they can make sure that what is written there really works and that buyers who see other testers, who see the testers' final projects, have a clear understanding of what the pattern really is. So look critically at the pattern and make sure that it fits your style and the fit of how you prefer to wear things. The next thing to consider when deciding if a pattern test is right for you is the supply list. Some people, I should say, keep a large stock of yarn on hand in a variety of weights. But other people keep a very small stash, and especially if that's you, or even if it's not you, I'll be honest, I have a ton of fingering weight yarn. I don't have as much DK weight yarn. So if I were going, if I were going to apply for a sweater test that the yarn needed was DK weight, I would have to go out and purchase yarn for that test. So take a close look at the supply list to see, do you have something in your stash that would fit for that pattern test? Or are you easily able to get the yarn in a short amount of time? If you're testing, let's say a hat, and it's in, let's just use my example, DK weight yarn, and you don't have any DK weight yarn in your stash, and you can't find any DK weight yarn at a local craft store, so you have to order it online. Ordering from a craft store online or a website, a yarn website, putting in the order, having the order processed, having the yarn shipped, that can take several days, even up to over a week. And if the pattern test is only a week long, you're not even going to have your yarn before that pattern test is done. So check out the supply list carefully. Also, check out the supply list for unusual notions. I design a lot of earrings that work around a hoop. That's not something a lot of people just have laying around their craft room, and so you'll need to purchase that. So you need to maybe track down where you could purchase that from so that you have some idea of how long it's going to take you to receive that project or that product, so that you still have time to complete the test. And if you don't, then you may just want to, you're probably going to want to just purchase that pattern after it's out and make it then, and not do the pattern test because you might not be able to meet the deadline. Speaking of deadlines, super important to note how long the pattern test is. And maybe this is just the way my brain works, but I really recommend getting out a calendar and counting how many days you're going to have, because I can often see a date on paper and think that's a long ways away, not realizing that actually that's only 2 weeks to complete a sweater. And am I a person who can complete a sweater in 2 weeks? Probably not. So look at the date, really figure out how much time is that. I also recommend looking at your calendar and seeing what you have going on. Most of our lives can kind of ebb and flow with time commitments to other things. And while you may not be thinking about it as you're looking at the test, if you look at your calendar, you may see, oh my gosh, I have a vacation in there and I can totally take this project with me and I have plenty of time. Or you may say, I have a vacation in there and we're going to be hiking in the mountains and swimming in the ocean, and like you can't crochet and swim in the ocean. So maybe I don't have time for that. The other thing is I always like to make sure before I volunteer for a test that it is plenty of time, not like, oh, it's a little tight, but I could probably do it. But like, I feel really comfortable with my ability to complete that in the time and even a little beforehand, because I have children. Children get sick. I get sick. And there are always special circumstances, and usually designers are very understanding of that. But I always like to know that if something comes up, we have to deal with car trouble or sick children or an emergency at the house, that is not adding, that the test isn't adding additional stress to my life. I like to enjoy testing, and so I want to make sure I have plenty of time to complete the test so that it's not adding extra stress into my life and that I can really enjoy it. You also want to look at what is the designer asking out of you from the test beyond due date, because a lot of times designers will request specific things from their pattern testers, and you need to make sure that you meet those qualifications. If the designer is specifically looking for advanced crocheters and you just started crocheting, don't lie and tell them that you're advanced. Even if you think you can complete the project, be really honest about your skill level. It doesn't necessarily mean that you won't get chosen, but it's really important to be upfront with a designer. I have learned on the fly on pattern tests several skills that I now love and am so glad I dove into. But you really need to be honest with yourself about your skill level, and then also honest with the designer so that they can make choices that they think are best for their tests. Designers can have lots of different and unique requirements for their testers, and you want to make sure that if you're going to volunteer for a pattern test, that you can meet all of those qualifications. So if a designer is asking for you to have a public Instagram account, lots and lots of designers, the yarn community is huge on Instagram. It's a very visual medium, and yarn craft is very visual. And so designers can often ask for you to have a public Instagram account for you to be able to share your work. But if you share your work and your account is private, then I, as a designer, can't share your work forward, and people can't come across it through hashtags and other ways of searching to see the design that you've made. So sometimes designers will ask for a public Instagram account. If you don't have one and that's a requirement, you can either make one, or you can say that this just might not be the test for you. I ask that my testers create a project on Ravelry. If you are not on Ravelry and don't want to create a Ravelry account, it is free. But if that's not something you're interested in doing or figuring out, then that also might not be a pattern test for you to take on. Also, a lot of designers, like I said in my previous video, will run a chat group during the pattern test. This allows testers to interact with each other and for people who come across issues in the pattern before other people to get those questions answered so that the designer isn't answering the same question over and over and fixing the same thing over and over, but also so that other pattern testers, when they get to that point, don't have to struggle with, is that an issue or not, because it will have already been answered. Different designers run these groups through different forums. And if you are not a part of that forum, or you're not interested in becoming a part of that forum, then you may decide that this is not the best test for you. If you ever have questions about any of that, now that I'm thinking about it, I ask people to have a public Instagram account before they test for me, but I don't usually note that that's where I run the chat group for my test. If you have a question about, will there be a chat group for this? What forum is it going on? Do I need to have Google Docs? Is this all done through email? What are these requirements? Ask. Much better to have your questions answered and to feel really confident that you can complete the test and complete all the requirements than to go in and just hope it all goes okay. It's better for you because you won't be stressed out about sudden requirements that you didn't understand you needed to meet, and it'll be better for the designer because they will feel like you are committed to their test and willing and able to meet all the requirements that they're asking of you. One thing to consider, and this is something that I think can be kind of you really have to decide on your own level of dedication to trying new things. Something to think about, I think, before you volunteer for a test is, have you made an item like that before? So if you have, let's say, a cardigan. If you've never made a cardigan, are you willing and do you have the amount of time to not only do the test, but have the learning curve of what is it like to make a cardigan? If making new things excites you and you can really focus on learning and growing quickly, learning a new item on a pattern test might be totally fine. But if you're a type of person who, when you're learning something new, you really like to take it slow, you're maybe not quite as confident in your ability to learn new things quickly, and you don't want the pressure of having a deadline on that, then you may want to go ahead and only test items that you have done in the past. So if you've made lots of scarves, start with a pattern test for a scarf. If you would like to pattern test a cardigan, pick up a cardigan pattern and work it so that you can figure out some of those skills and then go find a test for a cardigan. Again, if you have any questions about what is involved in the test, what techniques are involved in making the garment, great time to email a designer and say, is that worked bottom up or top down? Is there seaming or is it worked in one piece? How is the ribbing worked? Because that can change what skills you need to create the project. Never be afraid to ask. That's what designers are here for. And if you don't get a response, honestly, I think that's a good indication of the kind of response you might get from a designer during the pattern test. And therefore, maybe if you're someone who really likes to have your questions answered quickly and needs some responsiveness, which I'll be honest, I'm that kind of person, then applying for a pattern test for someone who doesn't respond to your questions before the pattern test may not be a great fit. So you've decided that you want to dive in and volunteer for that pattern test. Let's talk about how to get chosen for a pattern test. First, I want to say, please try very hard. And I know, oh man, I know it's hard, but try very hard not to take it personally if you don't get chosen for a pattern test. Some designers, depending on all sorts of factors, where they advertise, what the test is, how big their tester email list is, how big their social media accounts are, if they ask for applications on there, designers can get hundreds more people than they need. Hundreds. So it may just be a numbers game. There were so many people and the designer couldn't accept everyone. That it is very often the case that not everyone who applies gets chosen. And it really often, again, is not something personal against you. It's more about how many people apply, what kind of skills the designer is looking for. Some designers are looking for a really specific aesthetic, and so you may be an amazing person and take amazing pictures and be a super detail-oriented person, but if they're looking for a specific aesthetic in the pictures and that's not the pictures you take, they may not choose you, and that's okay. That's nothing against you. That's just a matter of the designer's personal preference. So try really hard not to take it personally. It is very, very challenging. I totally understand. I know personally the disappointment of being really excited to test a pattern only to find out that you weren't chosen. And it is hard. Each designer has their own process with how they choose people. Some people do it first come, first serve. Some people look through all of the applications and pick out who they think is the best fit. Oftentimes you won't know how a designer makes their choices. And so again, don't take it personally because likely it's nothing to do with you personally. If you are someone who really is dedicated to pattern testing and you've applied several times and haven't gotten chosen, it can be a bit of an uncomfortable conversation. But if you are genuinely looking for real feedback and you are told that you're not chosen for a pattern test, I would say go ahead and send a message to the designer and say, thank you so much for letting me know that I wasn't chosen for this pattern test. I would really like to be a part of pattern testing. Can you give me some feedback on some ways that maybe I could get chosen in the future? Some designers will be very uncomfortable with that and either may say, I just had lots of people, which could be the total honest truth. Or other designers, if you're genuinely looking for feedback, may give you some tips on why you weren't chosen for the test. And some of it may not be things you can improve. If you're a beginner crocheter and they're looking for someone who's super advanced, you can work to slowly advance your skills, but you're not going to become an advanced crocheter overnight. But having that knowledge can sometimes maybe make you feel a little better and can give you some direction on ways to go to improve your skills so that you can get chosen next time. So let's talk about some of those other things that could be reasons you might not be getting chosen for testing. First of all, it is super duper important that you are honest about your experience. Being a beginner is not always a negative. So be sure that if the designer asks what level you feel your skills are at, that you're honest. I have certain patterns that I'm testing that I'm absolutely looking for beginners because I want the pattern to be so clear that even someone who is really new to crochet can do the design. And so I may pass on some advanced crocheters because I need those new people to help me really clarify my design. And some designers are willing to let a beginner dive into a more intermediate test, but that's up kind of to the designer to choose. Once you've said, I think I can do this test, it's kind of up to the designer to choose whether they think that this is a good fit for them as well. So please be honest about your skill level. I will tell you the number one reason I don't choose people to test for me is this. I give very specific instructions, and the thing I'm looking for is, did you read all of my instructions and did you respond to what I asked? So if you ever see one of my tester calls, I will often ask for you to give me some information. I'll give you all of the information about the test, what you need, what my expectations are, when are due dates, and then I will say something at the bottom like, let me know what yarn you're going to use and what your Instagram handle is. If someone responds, I would like to test. To me, that is an indication that maybe they aren't a detail-oriented person. And one of the most important things for me in finding pattern testers is finding detailed-oriented people. I don't just want you to work the pattern and say, good. I want you to say, there was an extra space in that third line, or that sentence doesn't make any sense. So I'm looking for detail-oriented people. And if you don't read through my instructions enough to respond to all of my questions, it is a key to me that maybe you're not the best fit for what I'm looking for in a pattern tester. So read all of the instructions carefully and answer all of the questions. If they ask for what yarn are you going to use and you don't know, don't lie. It is totally okay if you say, I don't have any DK weight yarn on hand, but I would go out and purchase paint box, or I've been eyeing Lion brand, whatever. So it's okay to be honest about the fact that you aren't 100% sure on yarn choice or something like that, but don't ignore it completely because you may be sending the wrong message. So read the instructions carefully. Another reason you may not be getting chosen to test is photography. If you have started testing or just for hobby's sake taking pictures of your craft and you're not a photographer, it can be kind of a steep learning curve of how to take good quality pictures. And maybe I'll do a whole nother video on tips and tricks for taking good pictures. But your quality of picture could be a reason that a designer isn't choosing you. It is, I'll be real honest, super helpful to have testers who take really gorgeous pictures, though that's not the only thing I'm looking for. But it helps me to promote my pattern if my pattern testers send me pictures that I can use in promoting that are super clear, that show the work really well, and that are flattering representation of the work. Does this mean you have to be a world-class photographer? No. Does this mean you may need to watch a couple YouTube videos on how to use your phone? There are designers who exclusively use their cell phones to take their pictures. So do not feel like you need to invest in some great expensive setup and take some extensive camera classes on how to use a DSLR. Unless you're really interested in doing that just for your personal enjoyment, that's not necessary. Look up some videos on how to take great pictures with your phone and use those tips and tricks to take really nice pictures. Sharp pictures are important. If I've got a great texture, I want to be able to see that in your pictures. Good lighting is important. If your pictures are dark and it makes it hard to see the stitches or the design features, then that's maybe not quite as appealing for a designer. The other thing is, if you want to test items that are to be worn, a lot of designers want you to take a picture of yourself in the item. They want to be able to share with people, what does this cardigan look like worn on people of a variety of sizes. So if you are applying for lots of garments and you're getting turned down again and again, it may be because you have no modeled pictures. Which brings me to another point. You need to have a place where designers can see your work. This can be, depending on the requirements of the designer, a Ravelry page. You can make projects on Ravelry of patterns that you have created and projects you've done. That's a great way to show a designer a broad spectrum of the kinds of things you make and the quality of your work. I do have a video about how to create a pattern on Ravelry. If you don't know how to do that, I'll link that in the description below for you to check it out. Instagram and Facebook, as long as they're public and a designer can see them, are great ways to showcase your work. If you're somebody who really wants to be a serious pattern tester, and there are people who do test after test after test after test, and they do their whole crafting just around taking on pattern tests. If that's something you're serious about, having a dedicated and separate page, Facebook or Instagram page that is public, that a designer can look at and that can showcase your work, is maybe something that's worth setting up. It's totally okay to use your personal page, and if you feel comfortable sharing that publicly, that's fine. You don't need to make this a business. It doesn't need to be professional, but a really good representation of your work can go a really long way in getting chosen. As far as taking pictures go, I can tell you a little bit of editing can go a long ways. It is my personal preference against over editing. I don't love to see people sharing their work with filters that change your face or change the over filtering. I guess I should just say over filtering is not something I desire. Some people, it doesn't bother them, but there are some free and easy to use apps that you can download onto your phone that you can adjust things like saturation and exposure, which just means how bright or dark your picture is. And you can do all of your editing right there on your phone. really minimal editing should probably be required. And you'll get so that you'll play around with it and you'll see, oh, that looks really good. Oh, that looks unnatural. But Snapseed and Lightroom are two photo editing apps that you can download on your phone, that then you can do all of your work right there in your phone to showcase your work the best way possible. I hope that these tips help you get chosen for a test. If you have any questions about any of this, check out the description below. I will link to related things, and leave a comment, send me a message, shoot me an email. I would love to chat with this a little more. And if you'd like some really honest feedback, I'm happy to do my best to give honest and gentle feedback. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope I gave you some things to think about before you volunteer for a test to make sure that it's right for you. Down in the description, I'm going to link to a blog post. Connected to that blog post is a little place for you to put in your email address, and then I will send you a free download with just a way to organize yourself when you're contemplating a test. It has things to think about and fill out, little reminders that you can keep on hand. So when you see a test, you can take a step back and make the very best decision about whether you are really wanting to volunteer for that or not. And then I hope my tips on how to get chosen will help you get chosen for the tests that you would love to work. I do want to say again, just one more reminder, try not to take it personally if you don't get chosen. Often it has nothing to do with you and everything to do with circumstances outside of your control. So take a deep breath. It can be disappointing, but you can always buy the pattern when it's released, and then it'll be all polished and ready to go, and you can just whiz right through it. It is always my goal to help you grow confidently in your craft, and I hope that I did that today with these tips about pattern testing. Next time, we're going to talk about what to do once you've been chosen for a test. And so check out that video when it's released. I'll link that down in the description too. If you found this helpful, I would love it if you would subscribe to my channel, turn on notifications, and you'll get a notification when that next video comes out, if it's yet to come. And like and share this with a friend who you think might enjoy this as well. Thank you again for joining me today. Be sure to check out the description, and happy crafting!